I'd like to say a few words of introduction about the speakers for the panel, as well as a few words of introduction about Professor Brückner. Let's begin, actually, with Mr. Arman Oganizan. I'm really very, very honored to have you here, Mr. Oganizan. Pronunciation? I'm mispronouncing your name, right? Or can you? Okay, I mispronounce everyone's names equally, so I think in that sense I'm hopefully treating everyone fair, and I apologize about that. But he's actually a very prominent Russian. He's the editor-in-chief of the International Affairs Journal of Russia, which is really the prominent international affairs journal. We had the chance to benefit greatly from his keynote address earlier this week. It's been an honor to have you with us throughout the entire conference, and I think your role is very important on this panel as the only Russian. So in that sense, we're very much looking forward to your perspectives and also your insights. So thank you very much for joining us. To his right is Ambassador Karl-Erik Norrman. Ambassador Karl-Erik Norrman is fairly prominent in Swedish politics. For a while actually served as the head of the cultural department of the Swedish Foreign Ministry, also Swedish ambassador in a number of postings. Currently he is the Secretary General for the European Cultural Parliament, which is one of the leading cultural organizations within the European context. So we're really happy to have you here as well, Ambassador Karl-Erik Norrman. And last but not least, Professor Dr. Ulrich Brückner. As a brief story, I initially met Professor Brückner as his student when I was here at the Free University in Berlin. And since then, we've really grown a wonderful partnership and friendship. He serves on the board of directors of the Institute for Cultural Diplomacy. Also teaches in our master's program. In his spare time, his real job, so to speak, is the Jean Monnet Chair Professor for European Studies at Stanford University, mostly at their campus here in Berlin. Stanford actually has their own campus in Berlin, as well as consulting for the German Foreign Ministry, teaching at Tufts University, and the list goes on. So it's actually wonderful that you're here with us in Berlin this week, because very often it's the exception when he's here in Berlin. So I really appreciate you being here also to chair the panel and to moderate it. So I'd ask all of us to maybe give a welcome to Professor Brückner as well as the other panelists as we begin the final panel discussion looking at the future of the European-Russian relationship. So please join me in welcoming the panelists. Thank you.
All right, then, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, again. I'm happy to join you for this final panel discussion. We met already on Wednesday, and I promised that this is about to unpack the crystal ball and to look into the future, which is a bit complicated for all of us because it's only you who attended the entire conference, and you would be far better equipped to put together the different pieces of the puzzle to tell us how you think is the future of EU-Russia relations. And the only more or less random impressions I got from the speakers we met on Wednesday, and also what I learned from your question, is in a way something which sounds very familiar if you work in the field of international relations. Because most of the discussions and also the conflicts among scholars or also people who comment on bilateral relations like the ones we focus on in this conference have a lot to do with the glasses we wear. And then depending on the biases of the lenses we use, we either highlight the one factor or the other, and that causes forms of misunderstanding, which an institution like the ICD is trying to address by offering a stage which is not just a selected group of people who share the same lenses or the same socialization, but to do exactly the opposite and bringing together people not only from different backgrounds and official positions, but also of different mindsets to create exactly what this Institute for Cultural Diplomacy is about, to exchange on a cultural base. And so what I experience in this very short first hour of a panel discussion that we did on Wednesday was sometimes a bias towards a very interest-driven perspective. This is my position and I will fight for it. And we were criticized at this very moment from the gentleman in the front for being very old school, that this sounds like the good old times of, he didn't explicitly say so, but it sounded a bit like Cold War. And then some of the speakers who are very much into a more institutionalist point of view highlight another I word, not so much it's interest-driven and it's all about security, and we have to fight for a clear-cut position, which is not so much the case of the European Union, because we have now a phone number, but the phone number is more like the operator to get in touch with the other 27 representatives of national interest to hear if we have a common position that could match what Russia wants or what Russia insists on. And it was perfect to have a case here, not just to discuss it in an abstract way, but to see what that practically means if we have different opinions or something like a defined interest. But aside from interests and the institutional dimension, which was the main idea of having a long analysis of the role of the WTO membership of Russia, or the 4 spaces and the 2 meetings per year between the European Union and Russia, it is another I word which is very prominently addressed in a format like our conferences here, and that's ideas. And the lady in the first row highlighted the importance of identity, and if we don't know who we are, then it's extremely complicated to know what we want, because this is closely connected. And identity formation has a lot to do with what we do here, to interact and to see to what extent we can expose ourselves to the other culture, to overcome the old school problems that are part of our history and the luggage that we carry with us, but which are also causes of conflict, which we try to overcome by this form of cultural diplomacy. So on this very academic and very lengthy introduction, let's unpack the crystal ball and let's see what our professional observers here have to say, but I'm as much interested to hear what the future professional analysts have to say from the perspective of what you got and also what you learned from an experience like putting together different excursions and panel discussions in different formats, to see if there is something like a conclusion one can draw from a very postmodern patchwork of impressionists, I don't know, influences on your view of what you thought before you actually joined a program like this. So, Karl-Erik, look into the future. What is the future of EU-Russia relations?
Well, I think they are going to be closer in the first place. Let's state at first that Russia is part of Europe, at least according to some definitions. Russia is part of the Council of Europe, which was established in 1949, and which has 47 rather than 27 members. So Russia is a member of that, and one of the main criteria for being a member there is to have abolished death penalty. Russia has abolished death penalty, which means that at least according to some important European values, Russia is already in. We know, and it was clearly demonstrated by Mr. Kasyanov before, that Russia is not the best boy in the class as far as European human rights definitions are concerned. There are still some aspects to be improved there. But we should also be aware that there is a development. I have been around for some decades, and I went to Moscow about a year ago, and this was my first visit to Moscow in 30 years. And I tell you, it was an enormous difference, because in the Soviet Union, of course, if you were to meet with people like you, or with human rights defenders, etc., or activists, you would be sure that on your way out from the house, you would have at least 2 KGB guys shadowing you to the hotel, in the hotel, from the hotel to the airport, all the way through. I know because I witnessed this in the 70s. Now, so there is an improvement, but there's still a long way to go. And the bad news is, of course, that Putin has another 1 or 2 periods in Kremlin. But there are some things which are for the future, for the crystal ball, are extremely important. Some advantages which simply are let's say, impossible to look away from a European perspective. Russia is the strongest energy and natural resources power in the world. And the problem in the coming decades for Europe as well as for the whole world will be about energy and natural resources. The big problem, in my view, is that the population of the world, now 7 billion, might even increase more. And in that respect, we know that the energy resources are already consumed by the world. We are suffering in climate and environment from this overconsumption of natural resources. Russia have these resources and they will benefit from it. So it will be impossible not to have good relations with Russia from that point of view. They have another advantage. Most people call them a disadvantage, but I would call them an advantage, and that is the decreasing population. There's one problem with that, of course. They have a male average life expectation is 59 in Russia, which is shocking. But this has to do very much about the old Russian tradition of solving problems by drinking yourself to death. That's why the male, when facing problems, have really gone through that process, and the life expectancy has decreased. But apart from that, they are also in the very positive situation that they have all these former Soviet republics where people are unemployed, or where there is let's say an oversupply of labor force, and Mr. Kasyanov advocated a very liberal immigration policy, which I think is correctly right, and Russia has the possibilities to be the most positive immigration country in the world, because it's only 20 years since all these people spoke Russian, and their parents at least spoke Russian, so the integration process for Tajiks, Kyrgyz, Uzbeks, Kazakhs, etc., will be comparatively easy. Easier than immigrants in Germany, Sweden, France, United Kingdom, etc. Which is, all these factors come together in a very interesting way. We should not be too afraid of Russian military power, because if you add all European military power, we have about 3 times as big military budgets at least. Okay, they have the bomb. The Russians have the bomb. That's one big difference which remains from the old Cold War times. But, and then finally, being in charge of the European Cultural Parliament, for me, it's self-evident Russia is part of Europe, of European culture. Among my happiest events from my youth on is reading Pushkin in his own language, in listening to Tchaikovsky, in going to the Tretyakov Gallery, etc. Russian culture is part of European culture. So, in conclusion, the relations between Europe and Russia will grow closer with or without Putin. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now the Russian perspective. Armin, do you share the positive perspective of we are getting closer either because we want to or because we can't avoid it because we are all Europe, or is it not as happy as the first perspective that we got?
Well, since according to the statistics I'm now 58, so 1 year is advanced, I will be very sincere, but I will not speak on the just from the angle of official Russian outlook. It would be my personal. 1 year is not a big time. So what can I say? Of course, if we will analyze the situation in Europe in some important but not so crucial issues, like one that respected ambassador described here in Moldova, or Abkhazia, or other important, yes, they are. But here we are, as I understand, not to discuss how Estonia is feeling itself inside European Union, or how Moldavia wants to meet Europe. Then it's a little bit different subject for discussion. And we will not find an answer to the question about Europe meeting Russia, Russia meeting Europe, if we will not put it into the global context. It is not only a crisis of identity in Europe, and as I mentioned, it's a, so to say, side effect indication that we have many things in common in cultural sense also, that it's Europe, bigger Europe, from Lisbon to Vladivostok, that is searching identity, and we can't find it in another corner of the world, neither in the United States, nor Latin America, nor in the Middle East, nor the Arab world. And this is the indication that we are in one big boat. The crisis which we have witnessed for years shows us that there is practically no ideal model of future development. It's not the crisis of economy or finance. It's a crisis of model of development. When I look at the map of Europe, I don't see any strategical potential for added value of the economy and for this continent to breathe normally if it will be closed in a continental plus Britain part of the world. The only Russia, which is closer by civilization to Europe, which seeks the improvement and rapprochement with Europe, is this, as we call, strategical potential for Europe, and for us also, of course. And it is not only the matter that Europe is a huge market for energy resources, for gas and oil. No, in general, Russia understands that the worst of things in economy in Europe, the worst of things in Russia, inevitably. And this puts us very closely, and look at what is happening now inside Europe. Austerity measures now, they are so unpopular that we will see a row of elections in Europe. And elections in France already showed that that is a kind of a rebellion against this self-inflicted recessions through austerity measures. You can't always fight the problem through austerity measures, not giving. During the whole 2 years, European Commission didn't propose a single program of growth. So Spaniards are now furious, obviously, because 2 years has passed, and then now they are asked to be more cautious, more economic, and we are just in front of the. In few months, I think, or in few days, there will be elections in Greece. There will be a referendum in Ireland, and many would say, why now the fate of economies of European nations are decided not through European Commission, not through Council of Europe, but through the corridors of European Central Bank. That is now the center, proposing and providing new attitudes and schemes for the revival of the European economies. And what next? What will come next? Where is this reserve for growth? Yesterday, I showed you 2 diagrams about the increase and dynamics of German import-exports. Germany being a very, very developed country, producing a lot of goods, living, so to say, or relying on exports. And you saw that if the increase of export to the market within European Union increased by 80 and something %, with the whole world 12 and something %, and 30% more with Russia, you realize that Germany sees the market in Russia as a potential for growth. In Czechia recently, I was in November, I was told by politicians and economists in Czechia that they feel themselves like in a kind of a bunker because no additional prospect for their goods. And they are interested in the Russian market also, with a big population. So Europe needs to breathe and to develop itself. Finally, we are speaking about Asia. And the proportion of products that produced by United States, Europe, is shrinking starting from the 1950s. If these dynamics will be like that, in 20 years, according to the United Nations assessment, 80% of produce will be transformed to Asia. And you know how much it is paid attention now to Asia Pacific. So the idea of greater Europe, of bigger Europe, which can stretch from Lisbon to Vladivostok, will give a potential for Europe to find itself in Pacific. Vladivostok is there, after all. Of course, it's easier to say, because after Urals you need to develop infrastructure, many things should be done. That's what is implied by setting this new company, which will be absolutely independent from the local governors' powers and directly applied to the federal level, just to develop this huge area. Maybe as a proposition, preparing for this bigger Europe project. And I think this is the way out, that probably we can find a mutual platform from which economically, culturally, politically, we can withstand this growing crisis, which we haven't overcome, not at all. And we are not, of course, we are not guaranteed that this will not be happening in the future. Nevertheless, forget about crisis. Just for the purpose of development, it is very important. Yes, there are a lot of problems with values, with political practices, anywhere. I don't know a single country with their 100% good democratic standards. They are violated everywhere, and maybe every day, not every year. In Russia, in Europe, in the United States. We know it from the press. And of course we should, so to say, influence each other in the purpose to improve the situation in our countries. The values, democratic values or standards, it's not that once guaranteed that you achieved and you can sit on the fence and watch others, how they are doing. No. All the way around you have to fight and defend. That is the prime target, so to say, goal of the civil society, to be watchful in every corner. And one can say, as you know, everything is good with us. We are absolutely a kind of a brilliant example for everybody and everywhere. It is not true to fact. Yes, in some countries it's much better than in Russia, of course. But it doesn't mean that you can always point a finger to Russia and say, oh, you're very, very bad guys, behave yourself. No. I agree that now Russia is much more open for this criticism and can admit it. And it's good that criticisms do come, but you should adhere also to what Russians are saying. And not only Russians, peoples all over the world. I don't know, because not everybody attended yesterday's lecture. I want once again to, for example, to give you one crying phenomenon that we witness today. It's a huge exodus of Christians from the Middle East, from Arab countries. Does anybody paying attention to this? One article in Newsweek and one article in Moscow News in Moscow. And it is millions of people in Iraq with the NATO contingent. The amount of Christian popularity diminished from 1 million to 500,000. In Vifleyam, it used to be 85% of Christian population. Now it is only 5. 95 was in Ramallah, and now it's nearly 6. 200,000 of Copts had to quit Egypt just in the end of last year. And by the way, they used trucks to crash the crowd, and more than 30 people, Copts, died. Did you read about this? Or did you hear that the United Nations or United States or Moscow raised their voice? It is politicizing values. And this is the human catastrophe. Moreover, it's a blow to the culture, because this lie of Christians used to live for centuries near their sacred places. They worked out and developed unique type of culture. And their residents are being crushed, so not to allow them to come back to this, to their homes. So what's about Christian world? What is happening with us? Independently, we are Russians, British, Americans, Chinese. No, with China it's a different. With China is different, but at least with our civilization. So we have such a global issues. Of course, we can find ourselves in this important political issues and being meddled, overlooking the global challenges. But then we will lose our time. It's no time no time for spending time, so to say, excuse me for this tautology, to neglect the very crucial incentives for us to become closer. This is very important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Since we operate strictly under Chatham House rules, it is possible to comment on others, because that's usually not what ambassadors do. But since this is the topic of our final discussion, well, how do you see the relations between the European Union and Russia? It's not so much a question of us, the Europeans, and Russia. In this particular case, the European Union and Russia, because there is a future, as you pointed out, for your country, but right now this is the institutionalized form of dialogue, and therefore it would be interesting to see if institutions matter here.
Definitely. They met here, and I completely agree with distinguished previous speakers that the Russian Federation belongs also to Europe, not only geographically but politically. And I would like to see that Russian Federation will be sooner or later not only a member of EU but also the member of NATO. And from the Russian perspectives, if we are putting ourselves in Moscow and try to look around from Russians' eyes, it seems that the nearest need of Russian Federation is firstly to become as quick as possible NATO full-fledged member, with take into consideration that China is growing not only economically but military with a huge rhythms. And the Russian Federation, which you have mentioned, faces a deep demographically gap, which somebody tells me that Russians, they have a huge gap in ensuring border force army to ensure the protection of its own border all around the huge kilometers, thousands of kilometers of Russian border. If they faced nowadays such a problem, we can imagine how big could be the problems of Russian Federation on the basis of demographical crisis in a couple of years or 10 of years. That's why the problem of Russian Federation in its dialogue with the European Union from one side, and the problem of European Union on its dialogue with Russian Federation, is that unfortunately the Russians are not yet succeed to overcome its own complex. And when I'm talking about complex, I'm not talking about the whole Russians, but I'm political leaders of Russian Federation. Please take its very distinguished situation. The political leaders of Russian Federation, they are affected by this complex, and not a complex of inferiority, not at all. It's a complex about that somebody permanently trying to hit Russian Federation. And they're in a permanent weight position to defend themselves at any cost. And this is a great problem of Russian diplomacy. They did not realize that outside is the 21st century. That the outside, nobody wants to attack Russian Federation. It's not the beginning of 20th century, not anymore. Nobody intends to attack Russian Federation knowing very well that the Russians, they have an A-bomb, which could react immediately on any temptation of such a manner. And it could be explained that Russian Federation was permanent, a huge empire. And the mentality of Russian leadership is that we are great, we were great, we are still great, and we will be great. And anybody of international players should take this into consideration, that the Russian Federation is a very big and very important country. Completely false. If you have to succeed in the international nowadays games, you have to treat your own partners at an equal manner, with respect and with the temptation to understand at least what your partner wants from you, and to try to react with a proper, intelligent manner. If such kind of changes in the mentality of Russian politicians will not be as soon as possible, some huge dramatical changes we cannot expect. But let me once more to repeat, I am confident that the Russian Federation will belong to the European Union, and it will be much better for its own security for Russian Federation to belong as soon as possible also to NATO, to ensure on the Article 5 of NATO agreement the common security of its own members. One of my friends was shortly in China and has a discussion with retired general of Chinese Popular Army, and suddenly comes in dialogue, suddenly comes the Siberian territory of Russian Federation. And surprisingly for my friend, the Chinese general says, that's of course a Chinese territory. And then my friend asked, okay, but do you think it will be possible in the next 50 years or 100 years to obtain the control over that Russian territory? Well, but nobody is talking about 100 years. We Chinese, we can wait 500 years. They're acting quite soft, but they're acting. And when the Russian Federation will realize that the Chinese is a huge threat on its own security, then perhaps the final decision in Moscow will be taken quite soon. And a last remark, which I would like to underline now. Of course, the dialogue between Moscow and Brussels will be not easy. We cannot expect an easy way on this respect. But as concerning the small countries between these huge elephants, any times depend on the behavior of both of them. Some of my Poland colleagues told me, so you know, that Poland was permanently between two fighters. And our history develops on the matter who won at that concrete historical period. Sometimes it was Germans, another time it was Russians. But suddenly, unfortunately, Poland disappears from the political map of Europe after the same Hitler-Stalin pact. And the Poland, they feel they have a very, very sensitive feeling on this on maintaining and preserving this political dialogue between both huge players in order to ensure its own stability. And Moldova is completely on the same position. That's why we are pledging for increasing the dialogue between both parts. And I'll be happy, not only me, but perhaps my country and my kids will be happy when the Russian Federation will be in the same family, and we will act together, as Professor Brock mentioned, in order to interfere also in Asian sphere of influence, having Vladivostok on our board. So, thank you.
Thank you. Well, this is quite a forecast that Russia will join the European Union. We can also ask the question, who's going to join whom, given the size of the two? Maybe the European Union joins Russia, but maybe that's more a matter of taste or style.
Okay, should we take some questions?
We should take some questions. So now it's your turn. We again delivered something like our intellectual business card to show you what we think about this in general. Now it's your turn, and as I said already, you are now the experts because you learned for a whole week what the different contributors have to say about the stage of the relations, where we are from, which factors matters the most, and so on and so forth. So it would also be interesting not only to hear your questions, but also your comments on what your answer to this very general question is. And as always, now you know each other already, but we don't, so please also introduce yourself again. The gentleman in the front.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. I actually don't have a... I'm sorry. I'm Thijs Jaspers. I'm a Belgian student at Leiden University. Actually, I don't have a real question, but more a general remark to what Mr. Norrman told us. It's actually about the future of the European-Russian partnership when it comes to economic relations. I mean, you said you told us about the economic importance of raw materials, that Russia has a lot of potential for Europe, but I actually am kind of skeptical about that because of the fact that these raw materials, the resources, they are quickly declining. And Russian companies do acknowledge that, and that's because of different reasons, because of the lack of infrastructure, the bad infrastructure. So I think that there still is an opportunity on the field of raw materials, but this door is slowly closing. So if there should be a cooperation on this field, it has to go very quickly. On the other hand, I believe that that Russia is still a closed market for a lot of European companies, and that there are a lot of national interests when it comes to the European Union towards Russia to invest in the Russian market. So I rather prefer that way, but that of course means that it's more a unilateral relationship.
Yeah, may I comment on that? Well. The problem of disappearing raw materials and energy resources is not only a Russian problem, it's a global problem. It's everywhere. You can look around and see how the Chinese almost desperately go to all continents around the world, is looking for new raw materials to as input to their very quick economic growth. And this is a problem which is a global problem. I hinted it, but I could give you a lecture about this. The balance between climate, environment, demographic development, economic development. We are running into a problem which some experts are calling a very dramatic energy and raw material crisis. Nobody is really has a good answer to this. What I was saying was only that Russia is in a comparatively positive negotiation position because they have still a lot of raw materials, including oil and natural gas. And as you know, most experts consider that the oil peak was reached already a few years ago, and it's now only going to be less and less of oil, less and less of natural gas, and anybody who has resources in such a situation during the coming decades. I was not taking the 500-year perspective this time, but only the 2 or 3 decade perspective. In that perspective, Russia has an enormous negotiation position, both from a resource point of view and also from a human resources point of view, because they are well-educated people and they don't have a problem of too many, let's say, mouths to feed, and they have a good possibility of having good immigrants who can help them out. So the prospects for Russia are good. Of course, in Europe we have other things to offer, so I think I see a very good possibility for mutual exchange, and together perhaps fight against the global resource shortage which we are going to face in 20 or 30 years' time.
I want to add, if you permit me. You are right in the perception that there is no cheap oil and gas now. The exploring of gas and oil is becoming more and more expensive, and it influenced the price. Last autumn, I took an interview and spoke to the president of OPEC, Mr. El-Badri, in Vienna. They have their premises there, not in the Persian Gulf. And he also agreed with the Russian assessment of the academicians and Gazprom and big Lukoil companies that in future the price for any part of oil or gas produce will be high in its price. But nevertheless, the exploration in Russia is moving, as you know, to the north, and this also possesses a climate problem, because you have a land which is not actually a land but an ice. And it possesses technological problems, and of course it demands much more investment in this. Nevertheless, for the last years, Russians' output of energy resources, which came to the world and mostly to Europe, was doubled. And now imagine what will be the price of energy resources in Europe if this will not be happen. What will be the price which will make this current crisis even more deeper? And we have one interesting dimension, and this is a kind of an invitation for European investment to come. You know, we agreed with Norwegia, that was a historical breakthrough. We agreed together to explore Arctic and Arctic raw. Of course, there are very serious ecological problems connected with this exploration. We should be very careful, because Arctic, as you know, is where climate is actually starting to, from there, to spread all over the world, our planet. But nevertheless, it was a very interesting and positive breakthrough. But it is not a closed two-side club, Norwegia and Russia. One of the proposals for European countries to join us as a members of Arctic Union and Norwegia. Other countries are not the members of this union, but we are open for cooperation with European countries. So I think this is an additional, so to say, an additional plus to the idea of working together in a bigger Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions?
I'd like to dismantle an atomic bomb looming over the energy relations between Russia and Europe. I would say it's more of an interdependence than a unilateral dependence of Europe on Russia, because I mentioned it many times in my conversations with people, like, consider the last gas conflict of 2009 and compare how many sides lost, both Europe and Russia. Like, Europe lost jointly some $30 million and Gazprom lost $2 billion. This is just unacceptable for us to do such repressions with the energy power, so to say. There is a widespread perception of that Russia can do something bad with its energy weapons, so-called. And I can agree that in the respect of small countries, for instance, the countries like Moldova, I guess so, in the respect of some Baltic countries, can't be the truth, because the market is not big. But if you consider the trend, what is now going on in the energy relations between Russia and Europe, Nord Stream pipeline was constructed. It goes not through Ukraine, not through any transit country, it delivers gas directly to Germany. And if you consider Europe as a united market in the future, because, you know, the third energy package was adopted and the big infrastructure investment is going to be into interconnectors and whatsoever. If you consider Europe from the perspective of a single market, then Germany can be the energy hub to Europe, which already is the case to a little extent. And if you consider the exporting bloc of countries in the center, with a center in Russia, because Russia does now re-export of Asian gas, of the Caspian region, for instance. There are big calls for constructing the Nabucco pipeline and whatever pipeline you can imagine, but I'm not sure if you consider the construction of Nabucco pipeline and then try to talk to these countries that will deliver the gas subsequently then to Europe and to European countries, which will deal on that you're going to be agreed on the price. There's no guarantee in this. Now Russia has the mechanisms to re-export the gas because we have the infrastructure and we supply it to Europe. And Germany has infrastructure and will build new infrastructure to resupply this gas, for instance, to the other countries. That's what I perceive like the future of the main future of economic relations between Europe and Russia, because no one's, of course, surprised of that Russia is supplying the world hugely and mainly with raw materials. And of course, the problems of market, of size market of Russia is also important. So I see this the very good point of mutual integration and mutual understanding to dismantle the fears about each other. If there are two big cores, two big centers of exporting and importing, the risk of use of some energy weapons diminishes. That's my commentary. Thank you.
Well, maybe I can quickly switch hats and change from the moderator to the EU studies guy. This is exactly what I said in the beginning, that depending on through which lens we look at it, it either makes perfect sense or it doesn't, because you pointed out that there are two different rationales. The one rationale is, do we lose money? And if that is our main rationale, then your analysis makes perfect sense. But as long as there are also people in power who decide that it's not so important whether we lose money in the short run, but we keep our idea as a superpower or as an interest-driven or a security-oriented institution, then this rationale of losing money in the short run doesn't matter too much. And I think this is practically the kind of the pluralist nature of both sides, that depending on how you look at the problem, it either makes sense or it doesn't. I personally never understood why the European Union doesn't try to export its own model of overcoming conflicts and introducing interdependence also as part of their external affairs. But maybe that has to do with what we heard about the stage of corruption, the rule of law and all this, because again, it's based on what we discussed on Wednesday, trust. And if we find a way to build trust, and if we find a way to institutionalize the rules and the norms that are a necessary precondition for a functioning interdependence that you suggest, then it would all work fine. But I think this is, again, a very cultural question, which is harder to implement than just joining the WTO or signing a binding commitment, which is harder to enforce, like the statute of the Council of Europe. Yeah? Do we have the mic again?
Well, first of all, I completely disagree that even the short-run use of this energy weapon is acceptable and applicable in Russia. I completely disagree with it. It's just not feasible economically. When you consider 1 month losses of $2 billion, it's just 1 month, and 40% of Russian GDP depends on oil and gas. I don't think it's really considerable in some kind of 2 months or 3 months or whatever, half a year of using such an energy weapon. I don't think it's possible. That's first of all. And the second of all, I believe, of course, the integration and the building of trust. Well, I agree to this extent with Mr. Oganisyan. Building trust should be on some soil. It cannot come from just anywhere from the air. And if we discuss such things as culture, as morality, or whatever common values, this is something not feasible. You cannot touch it. You first need the soil, something to grow on. And this is what economic relations present a good opportunity on. If you consider the Europe project and the European Union emergence from the perspective of 1951, first of all, where it was based? Coal and steel. Economic relations, rapprochement, rebuilding of Europe, economic integration, not common values, first of all. And then it grew up into some kind of integration group. That's my point of view.
I think on the theme of trust, I think that is a very important matter here. Of course, as the ambassador said before, there has been a traditional paranoia in Moscow to be attacked. And I am coming from a country where our king was one of the first who really tried to attack all the way up to Moscow. Charles XII in the early 18th century. After him came Napoleon in the early 19th, then came Hitler, then was the Cold War, and then came George W. Bush and Rumsfeld and wanted to put these missile ramps in Poland and Czechoslovakia. These things are always there to somehow destroy the trust and to strengthen the paranoia of Moscow. But I think with the kind of regime that we have now in Washington, for instance, and with the fantastic example of building trust that the European Union has showed, there is a good climate for this trust also to be built up in Moscow, and I feel that it is there somehow, with or without Putin. So this is the good note.
Excuse me, I need to have some comment. It's not a Kremlin paranoia. Actually, it is, unfortunately, you may say, or fortunately, it's like rank and file. People feel themselves after the war is this civil war. You have to imagine what were the sacrifices of the people of Russia. Millions of people killed, and it can't be neglected. It's a big wound which is still being healed, so to say. And this sense and feeling of being safe, yes, it prevails, it's important. And I may say that some actions from the world leaders only confirm these apprehensions. For example, the price for reunification of Germany was that NATO will not go eastward. That was given personally and directly by Bush and Kohl to Gorbachev. When I spoke to Mr. Gorbachev, and I have a weekly radio show with VIP people of Russia, and I say, how it happens that they promised you, and nevertheless reunification happened, and NATO started to move eastward. But it is all Shevardnadze. He is to be blamed. Well, frankly speaking, I couldn't speak with such a person at this childish level, but that is true. That is true. Because Shevardnadze wasn't a professional diplomat, of course, but it was also very naive on the part of Gorbachev to think that what will be done like that. Although it is in the notes of his assistants who attended, the translators, they all confirmed that that was the case. Secondly, after that, in Paris, in the end of 19th, there was an agreement that no additional troops would be deployed in Europe, but that wasn't fulfilled actually. Everybody had forgotten. Then from the Russian side, they tried to recollect in the memory. We agreed. Now signatures. The situation has drastically changed, and So I agree with you. Maybe if it's not paranoia, but it's inertia of apprehensions. But me personally, I respect it because I can't neglect the apprehensions of people who, until now, every family in Russia lost somebody fighting Nazism. And you can't, maybe time has to be passed. And what I said about trust, it's not my idea. Well, I agree with this, but it belongs to one of the Colombian professor, Mr. Legwold. He in Moscow said a very nice thing, very interesting thing, nice. He said, trust is in the end of the process. We should work together. It's not the beginning. If you want, it's like a light in the tunnel. Dark, and then you have this light, but you have to work on some very practical issues together, side by side. And he said, we don't need institutions. We need general agenda for working together. It's not what we should institutionalize every part of our cooperation. And he also said a very interesting thing. We froze solutions. We don't froze conflicts. And this is true. We are freezing solutions all the way around. So I think that trust could be only in the end. You can't, as one Russian thinker said, you can't learn swimming, lying on the floor. You have to go to water.
It doesn't come as a surprise that we have a time problem again, but maybe we can put a few questions together and do then a final round. The lady in the front.
Yes. Do I have to introduce myself again?
Yes, please.
I'm Kimberly Huizing. I study at Leiden University, the Netherlands. And concerning the possibility that was just discussed of Russian EU membership in the future, I do not have a crystal ball and I cannot look hundreds of years into the future. But in the near future, I'm quite skeptical because aside from the apprehension we just discussed, if you look at the loose and limited nature of CIS cooperation and the emphasis on sovereignty in Russian foreign policy, I don't think the Russian Federation is very inclined to enter into any sort of union. And also we must remember that in the European Parliament, the seats are distributed in accordance with population size. So if Russia joined the European Union, they would have about 22% of the seats, more than Germany and France combined. So I think a lot of trust would be required.
We are not based on formula. We are based on the perception of fairness. And if we take the same model for the relationship between Luxembourg and Germany, then it would also lead to a massive gap in influence, but it's not the case. We cap the German participation in the European Parliament to, it used to be 99 seats, now it's 87. And no German has a feeling of we are dominated by Luxembourg citizens because it takes far less Luxembourg citizens or votes to send a representative to Strasbourg. So from that perspective, I think it's very easy to cap imbalances, but I think it's less a question of numbers. It's more a question of mutual perceptions and the other important imbalances that would occur no matter if we include Russia, the Ukraine, or even Turkey is a similar question. Not so much a religious question, but a question of size and its impact on the balance of power, the balance of financial redistribution, and also the level of how much diversity in a unity project is actually possible. But it's an important point. Other final comments, questions?
My name is Norma Wright. I am the Initiatives Director for ICD. For those of you who don't know me, I think quite a lot of you do. I am a 21st century European. I have listened to the lectures and I have listened to the conference. And the title of the conference is Europe meets Russia, Russia meets Europe. And the humanitarian aspect for Russia has a very bad humanitarian record. You have actually commuted the death penalty, which is fine, a step towards meeting Europe. Could you tell me in the future on a human rights issue, what other steps you are going to make in order to meet Europe?
Shall I accept your assessment and answer you? But I don't accept it. But as I said, the list of violations of human rights is everywhere, very long. As for Russia, you're right. It doesn't permit Russia or justify if Russia has its own list of violations, first of all. And secondly, what should be done? First of all, legislation should be improved. There will be should be new regulations defending the rights of people in different social stratas. You should take into account that nevertheless, after the Soviet Union, there was a zero level of a new nature of legislative norms and regulations in Russia. They have to build it from zero level. And in a sense, in your sense of democracy, this zero level, starting from if you will calculate, the achievements in this respect are rather significant because it was from zero level. But from the historical perception of Europe, with very sophisticated legislation defending human rights, it is of course a very low level. So what we are to do, we are to develop our legislation, first of all. Of course, we are to fight corruption, because without that amount of corruption, you can't guarantee human rights of people. This is secondly. And thirdly, it is a system of education, because the mentality, mature mentality for citizen mentality is being created in school, in family, of course, in school, and through the system of education. Unfortunately, I can't say that we now have, so to say, a system of education which helps us to build this citizen mentality. It should be improved in this respect. And many, many other things. What is the problem also? People, and what barriers, psychological barriers. People don't trust the formula that somewhere or anywhere the human rights are 100% guaranteed. They see political hullabaloo and hypocrisy of many big players in the world. And then we said, you know, in the West this is such and such. This is what we are talking about. And they will calculate, you go out in Norrman, what happens in Afghanistan, what is happening this and in this area. So why you think, and why you think that Western status should be accepted? What is the answer? The answer is very simple. Because it's an ideal part of our perception of the world. You can't point a finger to an accident, Magnitsky, or this or that, or this or that. But you should share the ideal of respect of one's individual dignity. This is the important thing, hardcore of the whole system of values. And through this changing of education system, new legislation, fighting corruption, and like just happenings like that you organize, and thank you for that, bringing closer the understanding, the perception of Europe, Russian attitudes to this. This is the contribution to this, only through this. Again, trust in the end of this process, improvement of the relation to the human rights situation in Russia, through working together, but not, we should forget this principle. As you know, in the Soviet Union, they answered, and you are hanging niggers. They said, when they say you, in the Soviet Union, you oppress people, your ideology is totalitarian, dissidents, and the only answer was, and you are doing with your black population this and these things, and full stop, forget about this. This is not a kind of conversation which will improve situation in Russia, not at all. But respect to each other, to your achievements, and to the perception and attitudes of Russia. By the way, not all the norms, legislative norms, are convenient for the soil. We have, again, the problem of grain and the soil. And you can't put them on stones. You should prepare soil first. And there is some legislative tradition of old Russia, before revolution, very interesting. And very, very democratic, like the system of courts, how it worked. And they justified even there is revolutionists who committed a terror act against Tsar. And they were free after the court proceeding, which was ridiculous in my, but that was the case. And I think Russia should recollect, not always take from Europe or elsewhere, it should recollect its own history. After all, 100 years is nothing in terms of history, exceptionally if in the context of Chinese mentality, who are thinking 5 centuries ahead. So these are very complex components that we need, and hard working is needed also. Let's work together.
just want to add a brief comment and underline something Mr. Orgazian said that I think is very important in terms of trust. I think in the end, that's also where culture diplomacy fits in the sense whether it's preparing the soil, as you were saying, or in the other ways. That's really, I think, the most urgent thing, maybe also the most difficult thing now. For many reasons, trust is difficult on both sides to be established. But I do think that's where we, as young leaders, as members of civil society, can help by conferences such as this, educate, enhance, sustain the relationship. Maybe we can come closer to trust. That doesn't mean we have to agree on everything, but it does mean that we can hopefully work together, that we can understand each other better, that we can respect each other better, and ultimately get that goal of trust. So I think that, I just wanted to underline that point. I think it really is crucial, and I think that's something right now that we actually can make progress on. So just as an opportunity for us to not forget. I'll now give it back to Lee.
Thank you very much. On Wednesday, I neither had the time nor did it really make sense to try to summarize what we discussed. Today, I think it would be too easy to just say, oh, there are so many aspects and we don't really know. I think we managed to touch the most decisive factors for the future relationship between Europe/European Union and Russia. And I think this is now a clear sign that there is a lot of work to do for the Institute for Cultural Diplomacy, as well as for what you are planning to do with either your personal interests in this topic or your professional career, which in most cases is more or less related to this. We identified the importance of energy, which doesn't come as a surprise. So it always takes two to tango, and a pipeline has two sides. So the dependency is certainly mutual, and we can use it in a positive way, which is again a question of perception and not so much a question of what is the one and only rationale. And if we get this message across, then we are one step further in the tunnel to see the light as the trust that can stem from this. The same goes for the various models of getting closer, the idea of interdependence as the core principle of European integration, that we become so dependent on each other that we have to respect each other, is the key recipe for overcoming problems that are as serious as the ones we pointed out with the numbers of killings and occupation and the self-perception as a victim. One could tell the same story with Poland, the German-French example, and we managed to find an institutional structure in which these dramatic moments in history are not forgotten, but they play an important role for the base of mutual respect and finding a way to define a common interest, even if it's not as clear-cut as we sometimes would like to see in our models. So aside from this, the identity question that was brought up on Wednesday, again, shows how important the aspects that we discussed, both in terms of demographic trends and what that means for the internal composition of a country, which then has to think of who are we and what do we want to become, and are we willing and able to integrate the other? Or what does it mean for our culture? Is it a more reactionist idea of this is what we have and we are not willing to open it? Or is it what culture always has been, that it exposes itself to the other to become something new, so it never states what it is? And from that perspective, it again highlights the importance to reflect all these very technical questions for economists and security aspects and technicians when we think of the energy question, that it always also has a cultural dimension. We should not only not forget it, but also put it as an important glue that holds all these things together. So thank you very much again for including all these different perspectives, no matter from which perspective we come here, and make a difference. It's not just, now we have discussed it, but take all these different impressions and ideas and contacts, because this is also a market for making contacts to get your different ideas into the right direction and use the resources that we provide here and make a difference. On this happy note, thank you very much for your active participation and also the speakers, and good luck for your future plans.